This is very basic. I'm just going back to actually Marx's uh, preface to the contribution to, or a contribution to critique of political economy. And I'll just quote basically some lines there, because famously that's a text where Marx actually, as he says, summarizes the results, or what he concluded after his inquiries or investigations, depending on the translation. So let's read this together and see and see then how we can relate this back to all the discussion of idealism and whatnot. I know this is longer than usual, but just bear with me. Well, I promise these slides, I don't do that many slides, but these will be helpful. Okay. So this is, as you know, 1859. He says, when I was in Brussels and in Paris, later in Paris, this is what I realized. Neither legal relations nor political forms could be comprehended whether by themselves or on the basis of a so-called general development of the human mind, but that, on the contrary, they originate in the material conditions of life. Now, material conditions of life, that's not a mystery. We now know what that means. And he explains, the totality of which Hegel and English and French thinkers of the 18th century called civil society. Okay, so he's basically saying all that is actually, we need to understand it, we need to look at political economy. Yeah, so some of those terms that could be, again, revisited, very basic, but really not. It's basic, maybe simple, but it is also basic in terms of being important to revisit. So the state here would be the political institution that claims the highest legislative, executive, of course, you all know that, executive and judicial authority within the territory of its control. So that's at least when I say state, let's think about it in those basic terms. And then material conditions of life, what does Marx mean by that? Again, basically everything that has to do with the material well-being of people, but of course it's their production. But I avoid production here because it comes back in the theory as social relations of production, because that's a different thing. Okay, material conditions of life is that, and political economy, the political arrangement of economic relations among people. The political arrangement, remember, so this is different than the bourgeois understanding of economy. This is the political arrangement of those relations, which is ignored, basically, more or less, in bourgeois economy, as you know. Now, we continue, again, the same text. In the social production of their existence, like the way we produce our material, whatever goods, people inevitably enter into definitive relations which are independent of their will, right? So it's not our own choice, and this is profound. We will come back to it, I hope, at some point. Namely, relations of production appropriate to a given stage in the development of their material forces of production. So all this is material, you note, and that involves everything: raw materials, the means of production. The totality of these relations of production constitutes the economic structure of society, constitutes that structure. So they're really not saying determines the end of the story. No, constitutes that basic structure of the society, the relation or the real foundation. right? Marx adds, on which arises so a legal and political superstructure to which corresponds definitive forms of social consciousness. So you see the relationship here that you have the foundation, you have the consciousness. Of course, this is a very quick and therefore inevitably simplifying version of the theory, but that's the point. We want to kind of reach the formula finally. So, but you see the point, you have the foundation, well, it is a foundation, and then you have the everything that has to do with consciousness at the top. So relations of production, material forces of production, things to keep in mind, terms. So the mode of production, this is broader, please keep in mind this. The mode of production of material life conditions, the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. Yeah. So the mode of production would be basically everything with so the means, but also the ownership of the means, and the social relations of production. All this we call modes of production, or a mode of production. So that mode of production, that in the broad sense, so think about it as in that sense as a category, determines all intellectual life. What is intellectual life? Really, basically, everything that is not material, and we talk about whether ethics, philosophy, arts, politics, laws, and so on. So this is the shortest way to put it. To put the entire, if we try the entire theory in one sentence, it is the modes of production versus intellectual life consciousness. Okay. And that's it. Then Marx himself adds this very famous sentence by now. It's not the consciousness of man that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. So even if it's true in a certain society there is more crime, then the main thing we should go back to, the immediate area we should look at is obviously those conditions of life, right? As opposed to say, okay, there is crime, therefore there are what? Bad values, what? Bad morality. They didn't read Kant, that's why there's crime, as opposed to maybe there's poverty. Maybe you could be an okay citizen without having to read Kant's critique of pure reason. It's a possibility. Could we entertain that? Or maybe I could be an okay person, not having to be violent or criminal or crazy without having to believe in any religious system. Isn't it a possibility? Right? Whether moderate or fundamentalist, I just could, as a human being, it is possible, provided that I live in conditions that are not criminalizing, that are not dehumanizing, right? So that's what I was talking about. Okay. Now, this of course, the theory is complicated, and then it is also a theory of history. Now, contradictions as the chief in historical progress. This is not Marx saying, I want this, or should be this way. He at least he thinks that he's describing how historical progress works. And at a certain stage of development, the material productive forces of society come into conflict with the existing relations of production. Yeah. So what is the existing relations of production? Again, It is like the indirect parts, like the legal relations, the say the moral dominant moral system. All these things are part of those relations of production. Relations of domination would be clearer in this case. Yeah. So at some point there will be a tension in this relationship between the foundation and the structure. And then things start to lose their stability, and that is at the time of uncertainties and possibly revolution, but possibly, not certainly. Okay, we'll come back to that. Yeah, from forms of development of the productive forces, these relations turn into their fetters, then begins the era of social revolution. The change in the economic foundation leads sooner or later to the transformation of the whole immense superstructure, right? So with like so-called the industrial revolution, there are certain things that are inevitable. It is not that, we realize that there should be some form of gender equality and so on. No, there are certain things it has to do with the mode of production itself. And these arguments, a lot of these arguments have been made, and they almost now should be common sense. Again, Marx doesn't get credit most of the time. What kind of arguments? Just for example, the fact that during the World War I and II, you look back, that's a time when, women in the American society become part of the labor force and, out of the house and all that. And this, you could look at it as, okay, we realized. We could look at it also as actually it was imposed by the system, by the change in the mode of production. In simple words, the need for labor force. When you have more men joining the army and more men dying, obviously there's more need for labor force, especially when there's a rise in the production of arms and so on, right? That's not a myth. You could actually prove that through numbers and all that. Yeah, and nobody is saying, of course, that the consciousness doesn't change or that doesn't have any effect. That wouldn't be Marx. So that would be very simplistic. That would be against everything Marx says. Here he mentions revolution. So again, the historical both necessity of revolution, but also the kind of freeing this concept from its sentimentalist kind of uses and contexts. So the material is there. Just let's keep this in mind. The material being the foundation, and the ideological being the structure that stands above that. Yeah. And that ideological, the way they use it, that superstructure, basically is everything that has to do with, again, ideas, values, norms, cultures, definitely. Because there's no such thing as, just people being kind of defined in terms of system of culture. That is another myth, another bourgeois myth, and especially neoliberal myth right now, as we talk about the world as just a bunch of cultures. Some cultures might look weird, but it's the culture, we should not say anything about it and so on. No, this is wrong. Your premise is wrong. You're dehumanizing people That is ethically wrong, but I'm not even talking about that yet. It is factually wrong. You are seeing the world in a very stupid way that doesn't make any sense. You don't have human beings in the world who actually value violence or love poverty. There is no such thing. That doesn't exist. That is another myth under culturalism. But anyway, that's a chapter of the book I'm writing now. So keep an eye on when that comes out. Okay. And there are some jokes in it. I mean, let's just be fair. It's not all depressing. And I'll tell you one of those jokes, okay? Just one. Have you heard of people, I have, when they tell you, the tourist kind of, 2-week, whatever in India. Oh, I love India. What I hear really is more like, I love my cat, I think India is like a cat or a rabbit, because it's India. You can reduce India with all its philosophies, traditions, music, politics, armed struggle, the Maoist movement, over 1 million freedom fighters, the miserable caste society, the suffering, the torture, the fascism, the anti-fascism, to just a couple of stupid images that have to do with sari and kurtan, the dresses, men and women, and the dishes, curry, stuff like that. I love India. And of course, here, the emphasis is not on India, is on the subject that is capable of loving. This God-like subject, this Jesus-like subject who can love India or Africa. Africa, as if Africa is just a village, When I will finish my college, I will go to, so what are your plans? I'm going to Africa to help people. You see the relationship here. Who's the savior? Who's the helpless, miserable? That is, I'm not, let's put the morality and all that aside, but it is stupid. It is a stupid system of looking at the world, and that's what we are dealing with now. And it is idealism in its worst sense, worst possible sense. It's dehumanizing, and it is horribly false, and it only leads to more wrongness and more falsehood, right? Because you simply can't deprive millions of people of the simple basic premise that is personhood. Human beings have personality, individual, and then they tell you this kind of thing, again, individualism is a Western thing. Other people's, value the community. No, that is a bullshit way to say whites are individual, autonomous, independent thinkers capable of making moral judgment, ideological judgment. The white whose name is, let's say, whatever, David, Matthew, could be a Marxist, could be a Christian, could become a Buddhist. Next week, you see David. David says, oh, I'm Buddhist now. I reached nirvana somehow. But the brown, of course, is born with a religion, is either Muslim or something, And that's it. There is no way out of it. That's how, when you hear there are that many Muslims, say, in Canada or France, it's not that these Muslims were asked, do you actually believe in God in the way it is described in the scripture? No, that doesn't happen. Because for them, the identity is determined essentially by that kind of collective umbrella. You're born into a world, you can't do anything about your, what your ancestry, whatever your parents, your family believed in. That's it. That's the end of it. So the nice way, and this is dehumanizing, this is racism like the old sense, except it changed its cover. Now it doesn't say it's about genes. It says it's about culture, cultural value, right? And look how more dangerous the new fascism that builds its vision about the other and the world how more dangerous this new fascism is going to be compared to even old fascism, right? Why? Well, it's very easy to prove the old racist wrong, and we did that. We study the human genes, and it's very easy to realize, no, that's complete fiction. Race is complete fiction. Racism is real, of course. But how on earth am I going to prove to this idiocracy, this system of misery and production of myths, that culture is actually another myth, right? Another Eurocentric, racist myth, internalized also by many others, not necessarily European or Europeanized, right? Why? Well, that's what we mean when we say domination, ideological domination. It is a paradigm that is dominant now. Everyone talks about culture, right? And you go to a university, supposedly it's multicultural, they put the stupid flags that's supposed to represent all of us, right? No? So that it is really literally everywhere. But anyway, I can't go more into that, even though I would really love to. But again, that's a chapter in my book. Hopefully it will come out. Another joke? Yeah? There are more jokes. But no, that's enough. Okay. So this is what Marx is saying then. Let's distinguish between the material transformation the material transformation versus the consciousness, like our consciousness of it. Now, this is dialectical. So if you say the people who's reformists, basically, and social democrats, those who became known as social democrats, at least towards the end of, or early 20th century, and now, still, those who argued that, according to Marxism, we have to go through capitalism, only then the transformation into socialism, communism is possible. They actually kind of completely undermined the dialectical philosophy here. So this is a very dialectical relationship going on here. One, the material transformation, Marx says, you can actually describe it, determine it scientifically. The other one, no, that is us. That is our consciousness. That's why struggle, revolutionary philosophy, proletarian philosophy, awareness, these things matter also. I mean, one way to look at it. Yes, that's the superstructure, but Marx never said it's actually just a cloud there. No, of course, there is also a relationship of, of coming back and affecting the foundation. Okay, continued. Give me 1 second, because I don't see the time on my screen. We are good still. Just give me, I promise, another less than 10 minutes. So this what basically also following that, then the argument is, you just as you don't judge an individual by what they think about themselves, that the same thing, one cannot judge such a period of transformation by its consciousness. Yeah. But on the contrary, this consciousness must be explained from the contradictions of material life, from the conflict existing between the social forces of production and the relations of production. Yeah? So this here it becomes more complicated, but that's what I meant. He's not saying our consciousness doesn't have any role. We have to wait until the right time comes, until we go through capitalism and all its genocides and so on. Maybe many of us will not even be around because we'll be murdered or died from hunger or wars or bombs or whatever. And then the time will come when it's ripe for revolution. That's not what he's saying, obviously. In fact, the point they make is exact opposite, but not in a simple way. And you see that also in Engels, when he distinguishes between the older conception of history, including natural history, and the Marxist conception of history. Basically, he says all our acts have ends now, and they have consequences. Those consequences and ends are not necessarily identical, but you get the point how human history evolves. It's our participation. We do that with consciousness. What consciousness, how we do it, all that always matters. Even when we don't know, we're still making history. That is the difference. That's a big difference than, for example, Hegel, who thought there is, since we cognize, then what we cognize must be the idea that is out there and that evolves, or, absolute idea and so on. That, to Marx and Engels, is religion coming back under different names. And everyone was guilty of that, including, unfortunately, to some degree, Feuerbach. Why Feuerbach? So I want to just pause for a minute here. Again, why Feuerbach is guilty of that? Wasn't he the materialist? Didn't he say God is a product of our own consciousness? Engels says, yes, of course, except what he didn't realize is that his depiction of the human being is also abstract, idealist, non-historical. Who's this human being? Right? And the funny thing is, you could take that statement, apply it to most of history of philosophy. It's true. The critique is true. Right? Of course, reading Heidegger sounds great, Dasein and all those things, you feel if there's you, there's the world. That's it. But here are a couple of legitimate questions. Where is Dasein at the end? Where is Dasein's body? Does Dasein get hungry sometimes? Or a better question even, does Dasein actually occupy a space? Or what is this being? Is that, or like when you're asked if you are a Heideggerian, what is Dasein? Is Dasein a masturbating being, for example? We don't know, right? Because human beings are, the combination of conflicts, material, biological, chemical, historical, and consciousness, of course, is part of all that as well. But we don't know if Dasein is actually a monk, a masturbating being. We don't know. That is a mystery. It's all left out. But that is the problem. These abstract individuals are illusions and only lead to more illusions. That is bad philosophy, and it should be dropped unapologetically. That this sounds way too strong. Okay, well, good luck. Well, this is Marxism, and that's why Marxism is not quite academic. Marx doesn't fit in that area. Okay, now back to historical materialism. So the idea of prehistory, history, I'm sure, read this. It is not difficult to get. Of course, we are living in the prehistorical time. So we are still creating history. We are creating it for most part kind of passively. And the only way for us to make that transition is for the majority to be in the position of being active, being human again, rejecting a social system, so social relations of production that dehumanizes them, that objectifies them. So this is a relationship of necessity. For the human emancipation to take place, this majority, the largest class, must make that transition. And then we step into the human history. What is human history? It is when the meaningful, the beautiful life starts. A world in which human to human exploitation is not just one of the normal things of everyday life, or alienation and depression are not normal daily things. Okay, you have heard of this. I'm not going through it. There's a lot of stuff written on this. But I just wanted to, in terms of review, just focus on one basic thing here. Here, you really still don't have the individual, because theocracy and monarchy are basically the rulers of the world. We are all subjects of the monarchy, and monarchy is the shadow of God on earth, and the individual is not born. In other sense, doesn't have any rights. Does, but it's not seen that way. That's the importance of the Enlightenment, where the individual is born as the right holder. Even though there's discrimination, women are not included, whatnot, but the idea. And that is the beginning of that revolution. But unfortunately, with it also, like bourgeoisie becomes, turns from a progressive class to a retroactive class. And that's a longer issue to get into, but the birth of the nation state as well to emphasize in that era. So, and then communism remember this, communism is defined against that historical stage, which is the only way to define communism. That's why it doesn't make sense to say, give me a full description of communism. It doesn't work like that. Join the revolution and then we'll realize together, Marx would say. I'm not saying that, I'm just explaining Marx. I swear. Even my cat is in, she knows. So this is the relationship. Forces of production, remember, includes means of production, raw materials, labor force. Relations of production, do you see the difference here? Ownership of those means and forces. And then the ideological superstructure is everything. I, of course, put culture right there in the beginning. Now, I should say, for me to get like this basic diagram idea of historical materialism, thanks to Marvin Glass, the Canadian Marxist professor who died some years ago, and I took a course with him. So his diagram was a little different, but the basic idea I kind of tried to reproduce here. And here, my kind of tricky question is, you see two triangles, two pyramids, but the smaller one, it's the other way around. Why? So this is the foundation, that's the superstructure, this is the other way around. I'm still calling it historical materialism. Why? And that is, let's end it there. But the answer to that is also the answer to many wrong depictions of Marxism and simplifications of Marxism. People have a wrong idea about Marxism, and then they attack that idea, they criticize that idea, but the whole thing is wrong. Marx and Engels wrote a lot, and to have an idea about what they wrote, an opinion, let alone an opinion about Marxism, perhaps we need to read some of those, I usually say. And how much did they write? Well, there's an English translation of their writings, 50 volumes, 50.